we'd like to welcome to the stage Mr. Glenn Tyre. Thank you for being with us. Have a seat. All right, so Glenn, as I told you the way these things go, I'm going to ask you a lot of personal details, a lot of personal information. So why don't we start at the beginning? Okay, that's probably the easiest place to start. When were you born?
I was born in Eustis in Waterman Hospital in 1942.
And were you the first child, or which number were you to your family?
I was the last of 5 children, and the other children were quite a bit older than I, so I was kind of a single child.
And didn't your brother say there was a distinction about you being number 5?
Yeah, I had the opportunity for my brothers and sisters to really kind of pick on me a little bit, and he came home one day and told me that he'd been reading that 1 out of 5 children born in 1942 was Chinese. And he said, so you're the Chinese of the family. And of course, because I love to eat rice, he really convinced me that I was part Chinese.
And tell us a little bit about your parents.
Well, my parents were very active people. They were involved in growing citrus, and that was the mainstay of Lake County. And everything I relate to people basically centers back to citrus days, or earmarking freezes and weather conditions and things that happened during my early lifetime.
And also you said something interesting, since your father's really close connection to citrus. You were born in June, and what did that mean to your dad?
Well, that's another little personal story. In the citrus business, you have many times 2 blooms, and the late bloom is called a June bloom. And of course, I was a June bloom. And once in a while, he'd tease me a little bit and tell me that June bloom didn't amount to much. So he didn't really think that I would have much of a chance to be very successful, because I was a June bloom.
Well, I think the crowd here proves that wrong, right? Absolutely. All right, and your father very well connected into citrus, very busy. But we talked about citrus, you and I have talked, we talked ahead of time, everybody, just so you know, we talked ahead of time. And we talked about citrus being so vitally important to everyone in the community. So why don't you talk about that for a minute, about how important citrus was?
Well, in the 1940s and thereafter, citrus really ruled. Citrus was very, very important to the economy of Lake County, Central Florida, and the state of Florida. And Lake County, later years, actually produced as much citrus as almost the whole state of California. And so our whole political structure was basically made up of citrus people that served on the school board, that served on the city commission, the county commission. Our representatives in Tallahassee were all basically from citrus families. And the sad thing about that is that if you didn't work in citrus or own citrus, you pretty much almost had to leave the area to go to college and to make money. And what's interesting about it, you know, starting about 1990, somewhere along in there, many of my buddies started coming back to Lake County because they remembered how nice it is here. And of course, I tell them I never could afford to leave, but I had to stay.
So it makes sense then, with citrus being so important, that your first job would be in citrus. So do you remember your first job? Were you aged old enough really to have a job? Were you in your teens by then?
Well, a lot of growers also planted watermelons. Watermelons was a premium crop for citrus guys, because number one, it was a short-term type of investment, and you could either make money real quick or you could lose it real quick, and it was a toss-up as to which one it was going to be. And so my dad grew watermelons, and my whole family worked in the watermelon citrus industry by growing watermelons. And it was unusual to clean up a piece of land and fertilize the soil and so forth, and plant watermelons, and then the next year plant citrus right behind it. So it was kind of a dovetail type thing. But one of my first jobs, I was telling Tim, was that I used to, when I was about 9 years old, we would all gather down behind Igo's farm store, which is now Tip Top shirt plant there, and load watermelons on train cars. And it wasn't unusual to see 30 train cars right out there, all the way down to what is now the paint store and
Tool World.
30 or more cars a day. And to show you how important watermelons really were in our economy, Oklahoma was kind of the watermelon capital, and they used to load as many as 100 or more cars a day. These were big train car loads. And anyway, my job when I was about 9 was to put a label on the top layer of all the watermelons. And you had to put them right on the curve of the melon where when a buyer stood up in the doorway, he could see that label shine all the way from one side to the other side. And then in the middle, you had to split it between the two doors. I mean, it had to be precision done, you know. They wouldn't let me climb up in there with shoes on because you damage your watermelon. So I had to go barefoot. And we had a local guy that I know some of you might know. He's now, or would have known, but he's now deceased. He was a pretty famous watermelon packer. And he would be packing those watermelons, and he'd chew tobacco and spit down in the crack in the watermelon stack. And I'd walk along there in my bare feet and step in that tobacco. And I'd get so aggravated with him because I'd try not to get assigned to his car. You know? I wanted to get somebody else's car. But that started kind of, you know, the pace of things about 9 years old. Then I learned to drive a tractor about 10 years old.
Once you got to drive a tractor then. Now, sticking on the citrus theme, because obviously if you start that early, you told me also there was at least a piece of equipment or a vehicle that your dad bought that made you so happy. Was it like a convertible or a pickup truck? What was it?
Oh, let me tell you what. We lived between Howey and Leesburg. And the first tree home machine was made, Mr. Conville know this, was made in Montverde by Mr. Smith. And we lived on the main highway between Leesburg and Montverde. And he would come by there once in a while with the snapping turtle. He invented the snapping turtle, and he also invented or played a big role in the first tree hoe machine. And when my dad bought a tree hoe machine, now I tell you what, I went to school telling everybody we had a mechanical tree hoe. And that was much more important to me than having a car. I mean, I didn't care. I knew I didn't have to hoe those orange trees by hand. Back then, you know, the Bermuda grass would grow 4 to 5 or 6 feet deep in this sandy soil. And the only way you could hoe those trees was with a scuffle hoe, and that's a three-pointed type hoe that you have to learn the technique of sliding it under the soil and pulling it back. But I learned too well because I had to do that pretty often. And when I got to drive a tractor with the mechanical tree hoe, I thought it was nothing more than a rototiller, but it was mounted on a tractor, and I thought that was fantastic.
We also talked about, you know, when your family is that involved in citrus and everyone across Lake County is that involved, that the kids are working, but sometimes you get to play.
Oh yeah. Once in a while we'd sneak around the backside of the grove and start picking the little green oranges and having orange fight. And we didn't have snowballs, but we had green oranges. But the problem was we tried to disguise it as much as we could and hide those green oranges laying on the ground because the growers, and my dad didn't particularly like that idea of next year's crop being turned in a tree fight, in an orange fight.
You also learned to drive a car, or you practiced your parking in an orange grove?
Yeah, I decided this on my own, that I needed to learn how to parallel park. So I thought, well, 2 orange trees sitting in a grove would be a good way to learn to park, to pull up and back up and line up with the trees. So
can you see it coming? Can you see this one already? Sorry, go ahead. I can just visual. I'm getting a visual.
Yeah, I thought that was a pretty good idea until I ran over a tree. and I got out, it was a young tree. You know, it was about 6 feet high, I guess. And I straightened it back up, and I got down on my hands and knees and tried to make sure the tracks were all covered and everything. And I drove it home and parked it. And it wasn't but about an hour, he walked in and he said, what artistry did you run over? And I said, how did you know? He said, well, come here and I'll show you. And on the bumper of the front of the car, there was a limb. I had covered all the evidence for that.
Oh, foiled. You know, we touched on the fact that you're the last of 5 children, that there's, I think you said 18 years difference between you and the oldest.
That's true. Yeah.
And your sister's here with us, right? Your sister?
My sister Joanne is here, and my niece Sue is here, and my daughter Victoria is here.
So your sister, who's is older than you as well, she was 10 when you were born. That didn't leave you with a lot of playmates at home.
No, but you know, I would manage to play when I could. And most young people back then weren't in some form or another.
So did this mean that you went places with your dad then?
What I would do, of course, being the youngest and wanted to get away from the farm because I knew my mother would find something for me to do. And so I'd call in his pickup and I'd ride with him for days, you know. And he had some grows over this way, and he also managed some grows for Dr. Tyre, his brother. So I would ride with him, and I'd meet all these adults. So I knew many adults in Eustis before I knew any young people, you know, because I was exposed to being with them because of the contact he had with them.
Well, before we go too far into how that expertise, how that experience helped you later, I would like to talk about your high school years, because we went to which schools where?
Right. As I said, we grew up on Highway 48. I tell people, Joanne and I used to tell people that we lived between Yalaha and Oklahoma on the Palackakaha Creek, and that wasn't too far from Ascatula or Umatilla. So anyway, we just kind of made do with what we could do.
And you went to, where did you go to school?
I went to Leesburg Public Schools, and then later graduated from the University of Georgia with a degree in agriculture.
Well, I have a picture. You'll see it down there. You see that picture of you from, this is, the one on the left is your picture from your junior varsity, 1957, Leesburg High School.
57, yeah.
And what position did you play on the high school football team?
I played offensive. Back then we went both ways. I played offensive guard and then linebacker on defense.
And then you graduated to, well, it'll work at some point.
1960.
Oh, there we go. You graduated to varsity.
Oh,
We have you here in the varsity team. And I like this one, if I can get it to work. Why isn't it working? It doesn't like me. That's you right in the middle, number 21, isn't it?
There we go. Yeah, there I am, 21.
If you need a better picture, we have a better picture of it. Doesn't look serious, right? Yeah.
That's with no pads, you know. I weighed 150 pounds and went both ways. And it was kind of interesting because other guys were not too much bigger except when we played Eustis and Bobby Green showed up.
Now you graduated there and you went to University of Georgia. Gator fans, it's okay. It's okay, right? So your family was originally from Georgia, is that right?
Right, from Dublin, Georgia. The Dublin, Georgia area, yeah.
One of the interesting things that you've already touched on is the way that Lake County history tends to follow a cycle of wonderful crops and then freezes, and crops and then freezes. So what brought you back from the University of Georgia?
Well, you'd think I grew up under those conditions that I would have learned to stay away from. But we had my first memory, of course, if you trace the Florida citrus records back all the way back into the 1800s, and 1894, 95 was a big freeze. And then we kind of skipped a few years, and the next one I did have an opportunity, or the next, there were some in the 30s, like 34, 35, and 39, I think, but at 40. But the ones that made a real impression with me was 57. I was still in high school, and that was a pretty serious freeze for Lake County. It did not hurt the whole state. It pretty much just drew the line between maybe Orange County and Brevard, and beyond that, they didn't get hurt much. But we got hurt pretty bad in 57, and I kind of could always tell what kind of year we were having because of the way we lived. You know, if my dad made quite a bit of money, we bought a new car, but if he didn't, we lived pretty conservatively. Then 1962, I was in college and had a new convertible, and my dad called me up and he said, "Glenn, you've got to come home and prune orange trees." And I thought, gee whiz, I'm having a good time in Athens, Georgia. I don't think I want to do that. But I decided I better. And he made a deal with me that he would buy, Jerry, he bought one of the first generators that I ever saw run with, had 2 skill saws mounted on a pole. And so he said, "I'll make you a deal. You prune all my trees with the help. And then I'll let you have the equipment and you prune anybody else's trees that will pay you." So I made enough money to go back to school. And it was a rough summer. That was a bad summer.
Now, was this the freeze that was Christmas a later freeze? We don't want to talk about it right now if it was later. Was it the Christmas
1983
So we'll talk about that when we get into it. Okay.
Bad.
Absolutely. So we want to go from there. You finished college, and then where did you go after that?
Well, we experimented by having some citrus retail stores in the north. In this one, unusual in Lake County, we had several families that used to have small packing houses that shipped gift fruit. And that was quite an experience in that, you know, back then there were no computers and no mechanical method of designing brochures and so forth. And it would be a full-time job almost in the fall to get your brochures and set your prices and so forth. And invariably every year we'd do that, then the freight rates would go up. Everything was shipped by rail, mostly. And so my dad and other family groups, there were probably 6 or 8 groups right out of Eustis that had stores in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, Maryland, and so forth. And we had a small packing house, so we'd ship fruit bulk to those states and then retail the fruit on site up there. And we'd advertise natural color, tree ripened fruit direct from our own groves in Lake County, Florida. And those Yankees would come in there and question all of us if we were telling the truth, because they thought we were crazy to be up there in the snow when we had property in the South, you know. And they would ask the truck drivers, "When did you leave Florida? And do these guys really own a grove?" And, you know, they'd ask them all kinds of questions trying to trick them, you know. But I ran those stores for 4 or 5 years, and it was ideal because I could still finish school, college in 1965, because I could go on the quarter system and work 2 quarters and go to school 2 quarters. Then I decided I could talk my brother into letting me come back and run the packing house while he stayed outside and bought fruit and handled the juice fruit operation. But I've been exposed to almost all facets of growing citrus, growing and marketing citrus.
One of the interesting things we talked about was, and we'll talk about this as we go into real estate a little bit more, but the fact that many of the citrus owners, and your father had this attitude as well, you would think they own these gorgeous, beautiful groves that go down to the lake, and you think they would have their house on that property, but that's not the case, you said, with all those owners.
You could not get and many of the people in this audience realize that too. You couldn't get a citrus grower to push up an orange tree to plant a house, even if it was on a beautiful lakefront property. They valued that tree because, see, some of those trees could be as old as 75, 80 years old, and some of them could grow to the height of 30 feet or more. And so the real value was in those trees. It wasn't in a nice big home. And so they lived in town. We didn't live in town, but most of the larger citrus growers lived in town and commuted to the groves.
What was the name of the packing house that you ran?
Umatilla Packers in Umatilla. And we had an Indian Warrior label. We kind of tried to capitalize on Indian River name of Indian River, you know, but it worked. Now, we did sell some fruit to the chain stores and some small truckers that would come in from the southern states and buy bulk fruit and take it back to fruit stands and things in Alabama, South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia.
You also told me, I think this was quite interesting, is that you had an Atlanta connection. I don't have any of those labels to show.
Earlier, with the fact that our family came from Georgia, they all thought that Atlanta was the hot spot of the South, and I guess people still think that in many ways. And so the two brothers had their own wholesale on the Atlanta market. So we had labels developed that would emphasize Miss Atlanta or Atlanta Queen or Tyre's Pride. You saw some of the labels on the display out by the table there.
But at some point you decided you wanted to get out of the packing house. You wanted to go.
Well, yeah, I was offered an opportunity to start a brand new marketing program for Florida Farm Bureau. And I think I was kind of excited about that possibility. I was the first and only one that was on staff to design and set up the whole marketing program for selling the citrus direct from one farmer in Florida to farmers all over the Northeast, mostly Northeast. We did ship fruit all the way to Colorado, but it was an interesting concept. And today they're still doing that, but they phased it in a little different way. They now concentrate more on fundraising, and we were selling cartons by the semi-load to farmers and Farm Bureau organizations all over the North. Yeah.
I guess my next line of questioning is, you've done this, you come back to the packing house. We didn't talk much about this, but I thought it was quite interesting that, you could have competitors you would have competitors in the packing house business. And yet, unfortunate things can happen to people. You talked to me about a community, the way that you would help somebody else if they had an issue. Either they'd had a fire or some equipment breakdown or something like that.
Citrus growers were always very benevolent, and they were very independent. The growers in Houston, as an example, I know for a fact that the first city pool was built by citrus growers contributing cash money to build a pool for the kids. And growers were really independent people. We had no major marketing order. The only marketing order the whole industry really ever had that I was aware of is that they would require you many times operating a packing house that you couldn't ship a large quantity of real small sized fruit. You had to juice that, send it to the juice plant. But we had no funding. There was no major government support at all, and growers would turn it down if it was even offered. I mean, there were times during some of these freezes that Washington and Tallahassee would say, do you need appropriated money to carry you through the year or whatever? And most of the whole industry would turn it down. I mean, they voted many, many times to turn it down. It wasn't until later years that some of the typical farm support systems became obvious that the grower needed it. But we never, we stood on our own. Everybody stood on their own. And to emphasize what you mentioned earlier, growers would help each other, harvest the fruit or whatever it might be. They pretty much wanted everybody to stay in business. They didn't try to manipulate, to the point that they would run you out of business. They would try to compliment you as much as they could. It was a network that really worked.
Well, I know you diversified. At some point in the 60s, you decided you were going to do more than just citrus. So
I decided by observing a couple other older gentlemen that were in the real estate business and citrus, I thought, gee whiz, instead of driving that tractor and spraying those grows all summer, I could sell grows. because I understood the technology and the terminology, and I had a little edge, maybe, if that's possible to say. I would make contact with a grower that wanted to sell, and I'd try to find a buyer for it, so it was kind of a one-on-one type setup. Then later in '83, when the big freeze came, I decided I better get in it full speed, and we were the first co-op banker office in Central Florida. There was no co-op banker in Orlando. I was number 11th in the whole state to sign up with co-op banker. And so I had opportunities to go south to work for other people. And many times I thought maybe I should have done that. But I decided not to. Lake County was my home. That's what I wanted. I wanted to stay and try to make Lake County, a place where everybody wanted to live and work and play and so forth.
Well, you talk about that transition in the 80s, so tell us what that experience was in 1983. What exactly happened for those of us who maybe were busy opening presents on Christmas morning? What
In
happened?
1983, the weather condition that fall, we had an extremely warm fall, and we didn't have any frost or any freezes. Therefore, the trees were still trying to be active in the xylem and phloem going up and down the tree, and they were like in a growing mode all year. And all of a sudden on Christmas Eve, we get news that there's a jet stream that's going to come across and dip down into South Florida even, and bring temperatures into Lake County of 17, 18 degrees. And Christmas Eve, I was working out in my lawn because in the citrus business, we had an embargo where we couldn't ship fruit the last 2 or 3 days before Christmas because they didn't want the market to be flooded. So I was home, and my brother was talking about the temperature being 17. I thought, gee whiz, that can't happen. That just will not or cannot happen, because the temperature that afternoon was probably 65, maybe higher. And that night it did dip down into the low 20s. And it stayed that way for like 3 or 4 days. And the duration is what really gets to you after a period of time. A tree will withstand, or fruit will withstand temperatures of 28 degrees for 4 hours or so. But if it extends any further than that, it will be devastating. And so, we woke up the next day without having a live tree anywhere. Nobody had any live trees. Everything was just totally wiped out. This county, well, I said that earlier about the production being equal to the state of California. Lake County had 114,000 acres of citrus in '82. And today we have maybe 10,000, maybe 10. That's how devastating things were.
So that makes sense why you transitioned into real estate, of course.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's a huge difference, and I think for those of us who either come to the county later or maybe don't realize what a huge shift that was, because you even said when a freeze would happen, you told me car dealers.
Oh, it affected everybody. Yeah. I mean, the merchants downtown, they all, suffered. When you think about it, I think I read where the total loss to Lake County only, when you use a multiplier of that money that was lost, it was like $575 million. And
Just a ripple effect.
About 20,000 boxes of fruit were destroyed that day.
So you started your real estate business doing residential real estate and then specializing in some commercial real estate.
Well, because, there was a lot of land that needed to be sold, and I felt like I knew where the land was, and so I tried to, if anything, capitalize on that. I tried to get in contact with the growers to tell them that I was in the same shape they were in, so I was trying to sell at the highest price possible. And sometimes, that's painful to realize that grows you were looking at that back in those days were worth $6,000 to $8,000 an acre was maybe worth $2. And but the banks all worked with growers back in those days to the point where, as long as you were trying to pay it back, they would work all kinds of plans out for you with interest rates only and things like that. That maybe today you can't have that relationship like you could back then.
Well, certainly Lake County saw quite a transition in the 80s and the 90s to residential. I think Claremont is a perfect example of that change. So how did that experience you had brokering groves help you to develop parts of Lake County, and what did you do around here that we would know?
Well, I realized early on that we needed to diversify, and not all growers wanted to see industry. Leesburg in particular turned down some real big industries that wanted to come to Central Florida. And remember now, all of our political structure was citrus. And I felt like that, we needed to promote economic development even back then. And so many of us worked as a team to try to organize economic development to the point to bring in industry. But we created our own destiny because we turned it away, and then all of a sudden we got busy trying to recruit, and you just don't do that, And even the highway structures in Central Florida, if you think about it, nobody wanted a road to go through their grove. And so in the legislature and everything, all of our ideas were to push the highways like I-4 and 95 and so 75, push them out to the side away from Lake County. Of course, Lake County wasn't a real desirable area for roads anyway, interstates, because of the lakes and because of what it would cost to build the roads to the central part of the state. So we sat here without any real contact exposure to the world because people were going to Miami and Fort Lauderdale and Naples and so forth, and they were driving, on the coastal roads and not through Central Florida like they used to with the old 441 and 27 roads that were important to our economy, and we suffered because there was no real, like I said, exposure to what we had available in land.
You had even said something to me about someone who didn't want 441 to go in a position it was. I remember we talked about that. That was just something we said in passing, but it sounds like it may be connected to this. Was there someone who owned property where 441 is now and influenced where it went?
Mount Dora certainly didn't want to lose 441 going right through town. They really resisted the new 441, and that's not quite the story they tell today, but it was the truth. That they were worried about the highway taking away their exposure to the world, but it turned out to be a real asset to them to have a quaint little town away from 441, or the new 441.
You're talking about your interest in economic development, and I think that's rather interesting, and you played actually a bigger part in that than maybe some of us even really know, because it's been a little while since you were really heavily pushing it. What part did you play in organized economic development?
Well, I started with a small group of council of 100 way back into the 80s, and then we had our own Lake County Economic Development organization, but at that time the county did not fund the program at all. And we kept watching Orlando and saying, gee whiz, it'd be nice if we could connect with them and get them to assist and help and work with us. And so over a period of time, we did get to join the Mid-Florida Economic Development Group, which consists of the City of Orlando, Orange County, Seminole County, Wake County, and Brevard County. So these 5 counties, actually, they became the metropolitan statistical area. And that's today when you read about real estate activities and so forth, it's really all 5 counties grouped together in one group. But economic development really has been difficult. We've struggled with it for years and years and years. Because when you stop and think about it, other than now Leesburg has I don't know how many people maybe realize this, but Leesburg now has the capacity to fly their jets out of there, fuel up, and they have the runway extended to where they can fly to Europe without stopping. And they also have a customs office, thanks to the villages. Now, industry leaders can fly into Leesburg and from foreign countries and go through a customs agency right there on the premises. And so we're making a little progress, but what I was trying to say earlier, up until recently, we had no major airport, and we still don't have a major airport, but we did have one that worked. And we had no major university, and the junior college has done a fantastic job of bringing UCF into their program. So we are making progress, but we've had to work through all of these programs without having much help from structures, even like maybe some state offices. Like in DeLand, they have Stetson University. They also have a large DOT office there. We don't have, to my knowledge, hardly any state government offices here within Lake County. So eventually this area will grow, and we do need growth. We don't have to have all these new developments in terms of residential, but it would be nice to have some strong commercial and industrial companies, because when you stop and think about it, they don't use, very seldom do they use the ambulance service or the fire trucks or some of the costs that our citizens, we use every day in our homes. The industry itself now doesn't send anybody to school. It's need elementary and middle and high school. Of course, because of having industry, there will be the need for expansion in those areas, but they will help pave the way because they will bring a lot of money in circulation.
So this is not a question I've asked you before, but it's okay. I think, what do you see going forward? What's the most exciting thing for you going forward in terms of new developments to improve Lake County? And they don't have to be specifics, but what direction do you see us going in?
Well, we are competing with everybody else. Everybody else wants clean industry. We want clean industry. We don't want the smokestacks. And when our northern people come to the area, they indicate many times, look, we came from there. We don't want to see it turn into that here. And I understand that, and I don't want it either. But we do need to continue to work toward emphasizing clean industry. And of course, the tourist industry has been a very, very important part of Lake County, and it dates way back. I don't know whether many people realize it, but there were hotels back in the 40s and 50s in places like Pittman, and I bet you all maybe don't even know where Pittman is, but Oklahoma had a hotel. Umatilla certainly did. Eustis had 3 or 4. Mount Dora had 3 or 4. Leesburg had 3 or 4. And there were a lot of emphasis on train travel, a lot of interest on boat travel. So it was only there again, we got kind of left out with air traffic because in my reading of past history, Eustis used to have a lot of tourist people that would come stay the whole winter. And when the Depression was over and the World War II was basically over, they started going back to their northern states and making more money for the next generation. Well, the next generation didn't want to come to Lake County. They wanted to go to the entertainment world of Miami and, again, Fort Lauderdale and Fort Pierce and Fort Myers and so forth. So they left us sitting here in the middle with an agricultural background, and that's what we had to emphasize and work with as much as we could to promote agriculture. And agriculture is still important to Lake County. There's still some groves and new groves being planted. Blueberries and other products are being developed for our type soils, but there's no crop that will produce the income that citrus did per acre over a long period of time.
So we definitely have to look for new ways to grow. Well, I think this is an interesting trend in the living legends that we've had, and those of you who've been here for all of them. Emma Jean Siegel still working. Evie Griffin still gets up every morning and goes have breakfast and then go tend his property. We had our 4 African American educators who are still very active. And Glenn, you've retired, or no, you're still busy every day at work, right?
Yeah, I enjoy it, and it's an encouragement to see new things develop and new ideas develop, and to see the expansion of things like I've already mentioned. The college, back in 1960 when I graduated from high school, there was no Lake Sumter. The closest junior college was Ocala, and we had no place to go. So things are really changing. It's just taken a long time.
Well, I hope you will join me and, well, wait, before you do that, I'd like to say that we thank you for being our living legend, first of all. We'll feature you in just a moment, but I wanted to tell you the Historical Museum to say thank you for your willingness to be grilled today and to share your stories and even the ones that were, the fact that you're Chinese, I didn't know that. Very nice. We want to thank you by extending to you something that we only give to a few people in the Historical Museum, a life membership at the Historical Museum. So we say thank you for your great assistance today and sharing your story. And also we'd like to just, well, first of all, I just bought a house from one of your
Sure is.
so thank you. Thank you, Sue. And we also want to say, again, we appreciate your stories and your expertise in still being a vital part of growing Lake County. Ladies and gentlemen, our living legend for tonight, Glenn Tyre.